With his monstrous side buried beneath a hood, Adrian finds a survivor camp. But suspicion grows. He's not just hiding who he is, he's trying to figure out what he is. Chapter 7. The camp. Adrian's hood was pulled low, concealing the sharp edges of his face, the hollow eyes that reflected too much of the beast within. He moved quietly through the shadows, his enhanced senses sweeping the area. It wasn't the first camp he'd found. Survivors were scattered everywhere, hiding out in the ruins, building makeshift shelters where they could. But something about this place felt different. He could feel the faintest stirring of life. Something familiar about the way the people around the fire spoke, the way they interacted with one another. It was a small camp, tucked behind an old grocery store. A handful of people huddled around a small fire, the warm glow flickering against the darkened sky. The camp had a certain grim resilience to it, a rawness in the way the survivors moved, the way they exchanged looks as if everyone knew this was temporary, that every night could be their last. But for now, they had managed to carve out a little slice of existence amidst the chaos. Adrian stayed at the edge of the camp, hidden in the shadows of the ruins. He studied the people from a distance. 3 men and 2 women. They didn't seem like much at first glance, but Adrian had learned not to judge based on appearances. One of the men, a heavyset figure with a gruff face and a worn leather jacket, was sitting on an overturned crate, sharpening a knife. His eyes were tired, but alert, always scanning their surroundings. He looked like a man who had seen the worst the world had to offer and still wasn't sure if he was going to make it out. His name was Hank. Another man, younger, probably in his mid-20s, sat next to him, fiddling with a broken radio. His hair was long and tangled, his face thin and drawn. There was something desperate in the way his hands moved, like he was trying to fix something that wasn't meant to be fixed. His name was Charlie. The first woman was standing just outside the firelight, scanning the area with a sharp, watchful gaze. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she wore a heavy coat that looked out of place in the summer heat. She had the air of someone who was always ready for a fight, even if that fight didn't come. Her name was Lena. The other woman was sitting on a crate by the fire, a book in her hands. She seemed out of place in this environment, her clothes too clean, her demeanor too calm. She had the look of someone who hadn't quite grasped what the world had become. Her name was Ivy. Adrian lingered for a moment longer, watching them in silence. He could hear the soft crackle of the fire, the low hum of the wind through the ruins. They hadn't noticed him yet, and he was content to keep it that way for now. But something about their interactions caught his attention. The way they spoke to each other, the way they moved around the fire. There was a strange harmony between them, an unspoken understanding. Then Hank's voice cut through the silence, low and gravelly. "So, what's the plan now?" he asked, glancing up from his knife. His eyes swept over the others, and there was a sense of finality in his tone, like they all knew the clock was ticking. Charlie shrugged, not looking up from the radio. "I don't know. We keep moving, I guess. Just need to find some more food, and maybe..." "Maybe what?" Lena interrupted, her voice sharp. She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing as she looked at him. "We can't keep running forever. We need a place to stay. Something solid. Something safe." Ivy finished for her, lowering the book and finally meeting Lena's gaze. "There's no such thing as safe anymore." Charlie chuckled dryly, but Hank was the one who spoke up, his voice steady. "Safe isn't what we're looking for, Ivy. Survival, that's what matters now." He tossed the knife in the air, catching it expertly. Ivy didn't reply. She just stared into the fire, her face unreadable. The tension in the air thickened, and the silence that followed was heavy with unspoken thoughts. Adrian couldn't help but feel an odd sense of familiarity with them. They were like any group of survivors he had encountered, frustrated, scared, but still managing to hold on. They were just trying to get by, just like him. He stepped forward, out of the shadows, his footsteps quiet but deliberate. The camp's dynamics shifted immediately, the tension in the air thickening as they all noticed him at once. Hank's hand went to his knife, eyes hardening. "Who the hell are you?" he growled, his voice low and dangerous. Adrian stood still, his hood drawn low, his posture casual despite the intense scrutiny. He tried his best to keep his voice steady, not wanting to alarm them further. "Name's Adrian. I'm just passing through." "You look like you've been through a hell of a lot more than passing through," Lena said, her gaze never leaving him. "What do you want?" "I'm not here to cause trouble," Adrian replied, keeping his tone calm. "Just looking for a place to rest for the night. Didn't mean to interrupt." Charlie finally looked up from the radio, his eyes scanning Adrian's form. There was something about him, something off, but Charlie didn't speak it aloud. Instead, he shrugged. We don't usually let strangers just waltz in. Everyone's a stranger now, Ivy muttered, her voice flat. You have a point, Hank agreed, his grip on the knife tight. But we've got enough problems as it is. If you're going to stay, you'll have to prove you're not a liability. Adrian nodded, understanding the unspoken rule. He wasn't here to impose. He wasn't here to fight and help. If you need anything, Adrian offered, his voice calm but firm. I've dealt with the things out there. The others exchanged wary glances, sizing him up. Finally, Lena spoke. All right, you stay for the night. But don't get any funny ideas. Adrian nodded, accepting the terms. Fair enough. As the night wore on, Adrian found himself sitting by the fire, his back against a crate. He stayed quiet, observing the group. There was an air of uncertainty between them, but it wasn't just about survival. There was something else, something unspoken that each of them carried, like a weight they couldn't shake. They spoke of the world before the disaster in broken snippets, a quick exchange of memories of what they had lost. A faint connection to the world they used to know, now slipping through their fingers. Charlie, still fiddling with the radio, muttered under his breath, I wonder if there's anyone left out there. Anyone who can fix this? I don't think anyone can fix this, Hank said, his voice hard as he sharpened his knife again. This isn't something that gets fixed. It's something we survive. The night continued with quiet murmurs and the occasional crackle of the fire. Adrian sat in the back of the group, taking it all in. For the first time since the change, he felt like he wasn't alone in the world. Like maybe, just maybe, he could find his place among these people. Even with the monster inside him, maybe he could still be human. Morning light had barely begun to creep through the cracked windows of the old grocery store when Adrian set out. The camp had stayed silent, save for the occasional rustle of movement as the others gathered their things. Rachel, Hank, Charlie, and Ivy had agreed to let him stay for the night, but their trust was still tentative. No one trusted strangers anymore, not after everything that had happened. Adrian had learned it the hard way. He pulled his hood lower, obscuring his monstrous features, and slipped into the morning mist that hung heavy over the ruins of the town. The air was thick with the acrid scent of smoke and decay, but Adrian had learned to ignore it. The smell of death was everywhere now. He needed food. The others had barely enough to eat, a few cans of beans and dried meat that were running out fast. They'd gotten what they could from nearby stores, but there wasn't much left. Adrian's enhanced senses guided him through the wreckage, sharper than they had ever been before. He could hear the faint rustling of movement, the distant call of crows, and the rapid heartbeat of small animals in the wreckage. There, hidden in the broken remains of a pet store, was a small cluster of rabbits. They had scurried into an abandoned cage, trying to stay out of sight of the monsters that now ruled the streets. Adrian's eyes narrowed. His stomach growled in hunger, and he knew that, for once, he didn't have to feel guilty about it. He could feed on these animals. The bat-like craving still lurked at the back of his mind, but he had learned something over the last few days. He wasn't bound to human blood. He could take sustenance from the creatures of the world, something that felt almost normal. Adrian crouched low, keeping out of sight, and in an instant, he was on top of the rabbits. His fingers, sharpened by the monstrous transformations, moved quickly, snapping their fragile necks with barely a sound. He didn't revel in the act. It was just survival. Once he'd drained the blood from the animals, he felt the familiar rush. But this time, it wasn't the bloodlust that took over. He felt a sense of control. The animal blood was different, lighter, not tainted with the rage of human fear. He could feel the strength returning to his body. His senses sharpened further, and his hunger subsided. The animal blood would keep him going. It was enough. Adrian stood, wiping his hands on his hoodie and glancing around. As much as the creatures had once disgusted him, he was coming to terms with his new reality. But there was something else. In the distance, something moved. Large, hulking, and dark. It wasn't a person or a zombie. It was something else entirely. Adrian squinted, trying to focus through the fog. The creature seemed to be a massive, four-legged beast, loping across the ruins, its movements like a distorted shadow. He couldn't quite make out its shape, but he could feel the danger radiating from it. It was new. Adrian backed away slowly, making sure not to draw attention. The last thing he needed was to deal with some nightmarish monster that wasn't even on his radar yet. But the more he watched, the more he realized this was part of the new world. Things were changing, and he was changing with it. Hours later, Adrian returned to the camp with the rabbit's blood still fresh in his system. He moved quietly, his enhanced senses alert, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. When he approached the camp, the others were already up, their faces grim as usual. But they looked a little more relaxed today, like they were finally beginning to accept his presence. He set everything down in front of the fire, his movements fluid and efficient. "You're back," Rachel said, her tone flat but less guarded than the day before. "Did you find anything?" Adrian nodded, dropping the food on a nearby crate. "Found some rabbits and some supplies from a nearby store." "Good." Hank was already reaching for the cans, his eyes scanning the bags. "You're not so bad after all." Charlie snorted, but there was a hint of respect in his voice. "Yeah, I guess we misjudged you." Ivy, who had been sitting off to the side, reading, glanced up at him. "I still don't trust you," she said bluntly, but there was a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "I wouldn't trust me either," Adrian said, his voice low but steady. "I've done things I'm not proud of." Rachel looked up at him, her expression unreadable. "We all have." There was a long pause, the weight of the world hanging between them. Then Ivy spoke again. "You said you could help. How exactly?" Adrian stood still for a moment, his mind wandering back to the creatures he'd seen earlier. "I can get food, I can hunt, but I'm also learning about the things that are out there. There are new creatures now, ones that don't belong here." "New creatures?" Hank repeated, glancing at Adrian sharply. Adrian's eyes hardened. "I don't know what they are, but I've seen them. There's something else out there, something that wasn't here before. It's dangerous, and we need to be ready for it." "Great," Charlie muttered. As if things weren't bad enough already, Adrian's tone turned serious. "I've seen one, a big four-legged creature. It was massive, but it wasn't human. It's like the monsters are evolving, and we need to keep our eyes open. Things are changing faster than we can keep up." Rachel leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "And how do we deal with these things?" Adrian's eyes glinted with something darker. "We fight back. That's all we can do now." For a moment, the group was silent, contemplating what Adrian had said. The air grew heavy again, but this time, there was something different. It wasn't just survival anymore. It was about adapting to this new world and figuring out how to navigate it. As the day wore on, Adrian found himself sitting off to the side of the camp, trying to digest everything he had learned in the last few hours. His new abilities, the new creatures, the constant feeling of being hunted. It was all part of this world now. He was no longer human, not entirely. He was something else, but for the first time since the change, Adrian felt something close to hope. The people in this camp, they weren't giving up. They were fighting just like he was. And that was something. He wasn't alone in this fight. Maybe, just maybe, he could still find his place in this twisted new world. Adrian earns their respect after risking his life to help, and learns he doesn't need human blood to survive. But something ancient is watching. Stay close, don't make a sound. Like and subscribe for more eerie episodes of Survival Horror Ambience.